Hi, how are you? Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Great. How's everything?
It's okay. I'm trying to join your ranks.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah. How's your campaign going? Okay.
What's that?
How's the campaign going? Okay. Aren't they in the interview here in a week or
Interviewing on
something?
Monday.
Great. Well, you'd be good. You're right. Taxes especially. So
We'll see.
we'll see what they do. You never know. Could we all take a seat in here? Or as they say in Bannock County, sit down. Thank you. Well, good to see everybody here. And I'd like to have the pleasure, I get the pleasure, to welcome everybody here and also to those folks that are viewing this annual meeting on public television. So this is all being televised, so they get a chance to see this. And so it's great to see everybody here and to welcome everybody here. And I don't know how many legislators we have here. I know we have one, and whoever else is here, if you'd just stand up and wave your hand. I think there may be, oh yeah, okay, there's a couple here, yeah, okay. I don't know how many others. Okay, well good, nice to see you here, and good to see representatives from industry and everybody else here, it's great. Today's agenda will cover highlights of this past year and what we see coming up for this next year and what we're going to see coming at us this next year. After the break, we will have a panel discussion, and I urge you to stick around and listen in on that. It's going to be very interesting. It'll stimulate a lot of questions and interest, and it's going to be on identity theft and tax fraud, some of the biggest problems facing us in our industry. And of course, one of the biggies in our industry is tax confidentiality. So it's going to be a big item. So stick around for that. That'll be great. And that's going to be right after the break. We brought in to enlighten us all two national experts to explain a bit about these problems from their perspective, and some of our own tax experts will participate in the discussion. At the end, we will have time for some questions from the audience. We've provided cards for everybody if they would like to write down some questions. We'll have some people coming around to pick them up, and we'll have a roving microphone here. If you don't want to use a card system, you can speak right into the mic and ask any questions you'd like. We would at this time like to, and I don't know if she's here, I can't, oh there she is. I'd like to thank the Idaho Society of CPAs for their sponsoring the refreshments at our break today, which we're going to take advantage of, and it's just out the door to your left and around the left in the cafeteria there, the Senate cafeteria. And the sponsor of that is Melissa here. So thank you very much, Melissa. We appreciate it very much. That's great of you. At this time, I'd like to introduce our chairman, Rich Jackson, and he'll come up and start us off on some items. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome, everyone. This sort of feels like old home week. I got to pick on Rich Hahn out here someplace. There was a tradition when we were the chairman of the Fed committee in the chamber here in Boise. We always had to have Christmas ties, and Rich and I are in uniform. And for some reason, this other CPA, Jerry Tarter, joined us too. So I hope everybody gets in the season and enjoys Christmas. See if I can get this. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. If you look at our world and you look at the tax commission as a whole, we've got three things that we have to worry about: our people, our process, and our image, and it's constantly evolving. If you really think about it, what do we mean by that? If you think about it, maybe 1/4 of us would be there from the beginning to the end of a term of a commissioner. In other words, I've told our folks that maybe 125 of you will still be in the same chair you were when I got here. And that's pretty remarkable change. So we've got to look at that ingredient and where we're at. The next thing that we need to talk about, and this comes up in a later slide again, but we are in the middle of upgrading our internal system that runs all the tax returns and all of the work, and that's called GenTax 9. And that is made by Fast Enterprises, and it is a tax software. What did we have to do to get ready for this? We have invested 37,440 hours within the last year. We reorganized a lot of our floor plan to get it done. We're getting close to the end, and I will come back to that. Now, the little picture has special meaning, and yes, I got corrected, that's a cheetah. And that is the mascot of Fast Enterprises. And especially, and I wanted to comment on this, Steve Allens, who's in our IT department, and Chelsea Roberts now, who was one of our attorneys, are involved in a group called Near Space Education and Research. And this specific cheetah was launched on October the 4th over by Sand Hollow, between here and Ontario. It raised to 94,311 feet, and it flew at 134 miles per hour, which is a record for that club. Now they want to, and it came down at Hammett. Now, in January, they want to try and do one transcontinental. But back to us. As I said, we have three ingredients: people, process, and image. If you look at people, and I told you about the tremendous turnover, well, there's two things that have to happen. Business must go on, so you need the intellectual transfer of knowledge, and you need new faces that step up and are willing to take the challenge. And this I stole from the executive of Hewlett-Packard when she was here in town a couple of weeks ago. But she talked about having the right person with the right expertise or knowledge base, with the right job and the right attitude. And I think that's key if we look at our organization and what we've got to do. When we talk about process, we're busily in the last phases of the testing stage of our new software. And you think, oh, that's easy, but don't forget there was a legislative session last spring, and we had to get ready for this filing season. And I know there's a few CPAs in the world, and we do know what the tax law is going to be for 2014, right? Last news I heard is going to be a little shaky this week. The 11th is the day, and I don't know what we're going to do. I've heard at least twice it may be next year before we know what this year's tax law is. And the only saving grace I've heard out of Washington, D.C. is we don't dare make too many changes because IRS would have to change all their stuff, which means we'd have to change all of our stuff. So we're hoping. One of the things that comes out of the new software, it gives us a far better ability to look at our database and mine that because it's interactive, and use it as we go forward. And that allows us to use that data to develop trend lines and a lot of different things. It also allows us to have a dashboard so we can look at how the system's functioning, how we're doing, and where we're at. And we're in the process of developing those too. We have to worry about our image. I know everybody loves the tax commission. I was accused of going to the dark side when I left the CPA world and came to the tax commission. And I don't necessarily ascribe to that because we've got a job and we've got a lot to do. But in doing that, we needed to perfect our negotiated rulemaking, and Mike could talk about that some more later. And we needed to improve our legislative process. And thanks to the Idaho Society and some other folks, we've made phenomenal movement this last year. And hopefully we'll be joint on some legislation that Mike will talk about. We're trying to empower our employees because they can make good decisions, and we know they can. And we want to collect this good data so we can be a resource and make data-supported decisions. Now I'm going to talk about, and this is the official name of our process that we went through, the 37,000 hours. But here's what happened. The legislature approved the $5.2 million for our computer infrastructure and upgrade. And I have to say a special thank you, not only to the governor, but the legislature for approving that, because we requested it for 4 years in a row. And I think all of our taxpayers really don't appreciate what it did underneath, because in today's world, and Ken will get into this later, when we start talking about fraud, this change was critical to us and every taxpayer in Idaho. And we're glad that we got it done. But anyway, that was July. October, we started back in 13. A year later, we were finishing up. Part of our system had been around long enough, it was version 3. And another, not very much of it, but part of it. Most of it was on version 6, and we jumped to version 9. And while we were going through, trying to get that approved through the legislative process, 7 and 8 sort of passed us by. But we're there, it's starting to work. Once we got phase 1 done, we immediately jumped into phase 2, and we're in the final throes of that one. On November 17th, for those of you who don't know what IFTA is, that's fuel tax, and that's a national tax, and there's a lot to it. But we have something called TAP out there, where the taxpayers can come online and do things and work with us anytime, any place. So they can do those IFTA or fuel tax renewals online starting November 17th and make their decal orders online. Far more user-friendly than it used to be. December 15th, that's next week, W-2s, 1099s, and Form 967, which is that little form that reconciles your withholding for the year. On January 15th, I'm going to knock again because I told you the setting at the national scene. We'll be doing some more return filing, which will be sales and use tax, convention tax, Greater Boise Auditorium District, withholding, and again, another aspect of fuel tax. We'll be able to do payment agreements online, permit validation, and of course, everybody wants to know where the refund is. It's probably the one question we get the most from anybody. And in addition to that, it's not on the slide, but hopefully we'll be ready for 2014 filing. On March 15th, and there's a couple of you in the room that worked on this, there was something regarding cell phones, and there's an E911 return out there. And we had quite a bit of controversy when that law passed, but that too will be electronic in March. So we're trying to make big strides and be ready for this year. What else is going live in January? Well, there's a fraud manager that's within our software, and it will give us some new capabilities. There's data analytics that we spoke to, and that will be making some big changes. There's a treasury offset or a top program. There's a levy manager, and then you heard me talk about the data management tools. We wanted to get a pulse of how we were doing, so we did a public survey, and so we did this statistically because we finally hired somebody that knew how to do this. When we did that, we sampled our 780,000 tax returns, individual tax returns, mailed out 1,800 cards, 198 were returns, so we got a good 11% response. And if any of you have ever been around that, anything over 2% is great. So that was a good response. It gives it some validity of 90% with a 6% margin of error. We haven't included the results here, but we'll talk about them a little bit. Our take-home message was a little over half of the recipients used paid professionals to prepare their tax returns. And oddly enough, in the past, Dan John and I followed that for years, clear back to, I won't tell you how far back, but it's been consistently about half and half. So half of the people out there get their tax returns professionally prepared. Most indicated that how they like to receive information from the tax commission were tax packets, the website, and formal letters, and their tax professionals. So I thought that was good. Nearly 2/3 were either undecided or didn't understand our laws. Does that surprise anybody? I don't think so. More than 80% weren't aware of the Idaho Taxpayer Bill of Rights or what a taxpayer's rights are. But if you think of yesterday, we always got a packet. There was always something talking about that. We don't get the packets anymore. We're lucky if we even get a postcard anymore. We just know to go to the professional, get the software, and get it done. So a lot of that, you look at it and that makes some sense. I'm going to follow up with two other things. A year ago, we had an Office of Performance Evaluation. One of their findings was to do a comprehensive taxpayer bill rights publication. We immediately brought up a website, and we're in process, and that publication will be out in January. We're continuing to develop our website. We're continuing to improve our data management to help us better understand ourselves and make big changes as we go forward. So that's just sort of a flash picture of this last year. And now, on to the future, and Commissioner Roberts.
Thank you for attending today. Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. I really only have one slide in this portion of my presentation, so we'll go quickly. Yesterday, when we were practicing going over this presentation, it became obvious that some of the future plans are going to make a lot more sense in this presentation if we give those after we have the panel discussions. So my presentation has been broken into two components. Part one, which I will talk about the data portion, I think that Commissioner Jackson has briefly touched on. So this year during our strategic plan review for the Tax Commission, we looked at our mission statement, our vision statement, and our very important goals that we have that run the entire agency. And one of the things that we did is we came up with a new strategic goal, number 4, and I'm going to read it for you. It's on the screen as well. It says, expand and enhance how the agency thinks about, maintains, and uses data to inform internal and external decision-making. So what does that mean? We talked a lot about, Commissioner Jackson has mentioned a lot about the new version 9 software that we have and the capabilities that come with that. So why don't we put it to work? Why don't we let the computers that today that have the capability of running these analytics for us, let's put them to work. So a couple of things that we're doing. The bullet point number 1 underneath that goal, you can read, but it talks about performance dashboards. So what does this mean? Well, as we sat down, we started talking about data. We want to know why people call the Idaho State Tax Commission. What are they trying to seek? What information did they not get? What information are they trying to find out? So we've been tracking those phone calls to know what kind of issues they call about. What are the most common audits or the most common audit findings? So when our audit division does about 25,000 in-depth audits a year, what are some of the most common things that they find where there's non-compliance in the law? Or what issues are most commonly appealed? Like when there is a decision and the taxpayer disagrees, let's start tracking those cases that we have and see if there's some commonality. Is there confusing law? Is there something that's not current with the practice in industry? Have the financial transactions changed enough since the beginning of sales tax in 1965? We didn't have computers at our disposal like we did in 1965 like we have today. There are a lot of financial transactions that are different today as well. Or what are the characteristics of the cases that are in collections? What type of cases do we struggle with collecting on? Is there some common threads? So with the tools within our operating system and the software, we're going to be able to start tracking and creating these dashboards that will give us information to better run state government. So number 2 bullet point is to get to that point, we created a data governance work group. So what we did is we pulled together the leaders from the different divisions within the agency, and they're going to be mapping out the agency categories. It's an agency-wide effort, and I'm fairly new to the commission. I've been there for 2.5 years, and one of the things that I noticed, it was easy for different divisions within the agency to do their own thing. You know, if they were in collections or in audit or in you know, revenue operations side, processing side, it was easy to do what they were responsible for doing and not talk to the other groups. And so what this has done is, in fact, we had a meeting about a week ago where it was just very encouraging to me to see the interaction between the leaders of our different divisions starting to talk about the interaction of data and what it can do to create efficiencies within their divisions. So the other thing that I think that's important is that it's really based on our strategic plan, and that's the objective. And in fact, one of the objectives in Goal 3 on another one is to seek and implement efficient operations with the agency to support our mission. Well, what is our mission? Our mission is to administer the state's tax laws in a fair, timely, and cost-effective manner to benefit all Idaho citizens. That's our mission. And so we're going to be able to use these data points to help improve the process and get to a conclusion quicker. Bullet point number 3 talks about an audit and collection case selection priorities. We get a lot of data from the Internal Revenue Service. Why do we get that? Because Idaho taxpayers' #1 starting point on their individual income tax return is the adjusted gross income from the federal return. So if there's a change made to a taxpayer's federal return, it automatically means there'll be a change to the Idaho return as well. Or it also points out where there's non-filers. If there's somebody who has earned wages in Idaho that has not filed, we are given that information and we can prioritize the collection and audit functions. Bullet point number 3 really deals with an agency research agenda that we have at the commission. And I'm going to get a little specific in this so you can kind of understand what we're doing with the data and what we'd like to do. So we want the data to give us facts, trends, so that we can make informed decisions, not only as commissioners and how we operate the agency, but we also want staff to be able to glean that information and make decisions as well. And to the external stakeholders, such as, and how do we do that? We communicate our findings and the trends through our communications division. Maybe it's through the taxpayer education. Maybe we need to change instructions on forms if there's confusion with the taxpayers. We can also improve our processes internally. How do we process forms? We process a lot of pieces of paper through the Tax Commission on a daily and annual basis. It's into the millions and millions of pages of information that comes into the commission. We can also look at where our resources are allocated. Do we have enough resources to handle the issues that are at hand? And finally, is there a need for a legislative proposal? You know, one of the things we're charged with, and Mike Chakrin's going to talk on this next, is that we're required to report to the legislature and to the governor's office and make recommendations. And so we want to be able to use this data and the strategic goal number 4 to help shape how we operate the tax commission and the whole time, and how to be a benefit and a resource for the taxpayers of the state of Idaho. So that's part 1 of the presentation. I'm now going to turn it over to Mike Chakrin, who's going to walk us through some of the legislative proposals, and you will hear from me again on part 2 after the panel. So, Mike?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Mike Chakrin, Tax Policy Manager at the State Tax Commission. Wanted to talk about a couple of things this afternoon. Legislation, rules, and policy. And they're separate yet very interrelated. So let's talk a little bit about our legislative proposals that we've got on the table this year. Commissioner Roberts talked about our legislative charge. And again, I'll read it out just so that the folks out there in the hinterlands can, if they can't read the screen. And it's to recommend to the governor such amendments, changes, and modifications of the various tax laws necessary to remedy injustice and irregularities in taxation and to facilitate assessment and collection of taxes in the most economical and efficient manner. And the Tax Commission views this charge very narrowly. It's not our job to set tax policy. That's the job of the legislature. And so part of our job is to help them do their job. And we have kind of 8 primary proposals this year, excluding some sales tax changes that I want to talk about. So with that, let's talk about our first proposal. And this has to do with the claim of right doctrine. And we run into situations where, a taxpayer may have to take money into income and pay tax on that income. And then, because of certain circumstances come up, they may have to pay that money back in 2 or 3 years. And it's fine if it works out where they can claim a deduction in that year and offset that income. They're basically made whole. But some people run into the situation where in the year they pay that income back, they may not have any income to offset. And so as a result, they end up paying tax on money they never really received. So we propose to fix that injustice by allowing them to claim a credit if they receive no benefit from the deduction. Another bill is our annual conformity bill. This is the bill, it's probably to us, and I think probably the practitioner community, is probably the most important bill that the legislature passes every year. This is the bill that sets the starting point for computing Idaho taxable income, because we start with that federal taxable income number. One of the things we do have to wait on, because like Chairman Jackson mentioned, Congress is still dealing around with the extenders bill, all these expiring provisions, what they're going to do with them or whatnot. We have to wait on that and kind of determine what the fiscal note will be for the state of Idaho for the conformity bill. The third item on this particular slide has to do with the retirement benefits deduction. And Idaho does not tax Social Security benefits. We also don't tax retirement benefits from federal workers if they were covered under the old civil service retirement system. We found some other taxpayers at the federal level, those that were covered under a certain retirement program for the Foreign Service, that are in that same position, yet we're taxing their benefits, and we feel that's not appropriate, and so we're going to propose that they be allowed to receive a deduction for those retiree benefits as well. Another one of our proposals has to do with the domestic production activities deduction and the Idaho net operating loss. You're probably wondering, what the heck is a domestic production activity deduction? This is the provision in the Internal Revenue Code that allows certain manufacturers and people that produce certain things to claim a deduction. It's based on a percentage of their qualified production income or their taxable income, whichever is less. I think it's 9% for this year. And they get to take that as a deduction, no questions asked, basically. So it's kind of a deduction based on a bunch of other deductions and the income from that operation. We run into a problem. The feds do not want to allow those companies to basically claim that production activities deduction and then also have that be built into their net operating loss. Idaho, for whatever reason, didn't follow that approach, and we think it's probably appropriate that we do, so that we would modify the statute so that you can't use that domestic production activities deduction to increase your Idaho net operating loss. We have another proposal relating to charitable contributions. Again, taxpayers can run into a situation where they donate money to charities, and at the federal level, they may have a rich delimitation where they don't get the full benefit of those charitable contributions in that year. They have a carryover. That works fine as long as they don't have a net operating loss again. If they have an Idaho net operating loss, they can lose the benefit of that carryover because we don't follow the same carryover rules as the IRS does. This would allow those people to get that deduction. We have a couple of sales tax proposals. The first one has to do with the sales of certain types of utility-type vehicles and specialty off-highway vehicles. And I'll use a little scenario here. Let's say I'm an Oregon resident, and I drive over to Weiser, and I want to buy an ATV. I can go to that dealer and buy that ATV, and I don't have to pay sales tax on that transaction because I'm going to take it back to Oregon and use it in Oregon, license and title it in Oregon. But if I go to that same dealer and want to buy a utility-type vehicle, I have to pay sales tax on that. which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense because I'm going to take it back to Oregon and title it and license it in Oregon and use it in Oregon. So we have an inequity that's built up here between two basically similar type products. And we would propose that those type of vehicles be exempt from sales to non-residents, assuming they meet the other requirements. The second item on the list there relates to the hand tool exception to the production exemption. Now that kind of sounds a little awkward, but in the sales tax code, you have the ability, if you engage in certain production activities, to buy materials and equipment and whatnot, and not pay sales tax on that, because ultimately those products will probably be used in products that will be subject to sales tax somewhere down the road. But in that production exemption, there's an exception for hand tools valued at $100 or less, which means you have to pay sales tax on those items. So what we're finding now is a lot of vendors, they get the blanket sales tax exemption form, and they sell these items to these people, and they don't collect sales tax. We come in on an audit, and we see that, and then we're going to assess that company sales tax, and usually we do audits for 3 years, so they get a whopping sales tax bill if they haven't followed the rules exactly. And on the other side of the coin, we can do the same thing for somebody that buys these materials. If they haven't paid use tax on those purchases, or they haven't paid sales tax on it, we will assess them tax accordingly. And it's becoming a very a burden for taxpayers to comply with, and it's a burden for us to administer this. And the hand tools now, you don't buy much for $100, so we're almost getting to the point where these are consumable supplies. So we propose to eliminate the hand tool exemption so that they can now purchase those items and not pay sales tax if they're covered under, if it otherwise qualifies. We have another important bill in the area of electronic filing. A lot of tax software packages support business e-filing for the federal return, the Idaho income tax return, personal income tax return, and federal business returns. But a lot of these vendors won't support business electronic filing for business returns to Idaho. So if you prepare your partnership return at the federal level, you send that off to the IRS. When they prepare their Idaho return, their partnership return, they have to print that return off. They have to print off a copy of their federal return and then mail that return to the tax commission. And what this proposal would do is say that if you're a paid preparer doing more than 25 returns, then you have to submit those returns electronically to the state tax commission. And it also would apply to large corporations with $10 million in assets or more, large partnerships, or large S corporations with 100 or more shareholders or partners. And the goal is not to penalize the preparers, it's to get these tax software developers to provide this functionality to their clients. This is our poster child for this proposal. The box, there are 15 boxes there. They contained 30 separate tax returns, and these were sent in by just one preparer. And he has to send this type of material to us periodically in boxes and bundles like this. His software does not support Idaho business e-filing, so we view this as a win-win for the tax commission because we don't have to sit there and image that big stack of paper, and the taxpayer doesn't have to go through the time and expense of printing those documents off and then mailing them to the tax commission and hope that we get them all, because the mails and postage can sometimes go awry. Chairman Jackson mentioned about negotiated rulemaking, so I'm going to change gears a little bit here and kind of get into the next step after the legislative process is over and talk a little bit about our negotiated rulemaking process. And I'm getting a very hurry-up call here, so I'm going to wing through this fairly quickly. So rules come from 3 places. The legislature makes a law change. Tax Commission staff says, gee, we need to fix this rule because we don't think it's working right. And we also get input from the taxpayers, particularly the practitioner community, that, hey, this rule doesn't work quite right anymore. We need to fix that. So we will sit down and evaluate the legislative proposals or the rules that we may have to develop. And we'll look at them and say, do we have to negotiate this rule? We try to do negotiated rulemaking as much as possible, but we don't have to do it if there's a need for a temporary rule, or if it's just a technical change like modifying a rule for an inflation adjustment, or if we feel that there's no way possible that we're going to achieve a consensus on this rulemaking. So, negotiated rulemaking, tax commission rule. We're going to identify rules that need to be changed. We're going to do the proper noticing to make sure that the public is aware of what we're trying to do with the rulemaking. We're going to try and contact taxpayers that we think are going to be affected by this rule and reach out and tell them that what we want to do. We're going to post stuff on the information about drafts of rules, when we're going to hold meetings, public comment periods and whatnot. So we want to get public involvement in the front end of the rulemaking process, which is the whole purpose of this negotiated rulemaking exercise. And then the public's role is kind of pay attention to what's going on out there. You know, we'll put this stuff in the administrative bulletin. If you have an industry that you think the tax commission might be looking into for a rules change, you might want to read the bulletin and find out what's going on. Or check our website, tax.idaho.gov, and see what's transpiring with rules. And also you can participate either at public meetings. We hold periodic open rules meetings. You can talk about rules. We'll have drafts, and you can comment on them. You can participate by phone, send in comments after the facts. And then one of the most important things is that we're going to listen to those comments, and we're going to take those comments to heart when we prepare the rules. You can see what's going on rules and kind of an overview of the rulemaking process at tax.idaho.gov/rules. So a lot of good stuff out there for that. Then finally, I want to talk about tax policy update. You know, the Tax Commission is made up of many separate business units. We got audit, revenue operations, and then my unit, policy. And we do a lot of different things. We handle appeals, we do rules development, we do forms development. We also modify, you know, instructions based on legislative changes. We do external meetings with stakeholders on how to improve the rules, or, you know, educate and outreach on legislative issues, new bills that pass and whatnot. We do a lot of also training of in-house staff and whatnot. So we do a lot of different things. But what we find is that it's hard to do that many things well with just 9 people. So what we're going to do is split policy into 2 separate sections. We're going to have a section that's going to be devoted more for policy issues, and a section that's going to be devoted pretty much exclusively to handling the appeal side of life, because they're really 2 different universes. And our goal is, one, to reduce our processing time for getting appeals out the door, and also do a better job of reaching out to legislators and offering our support and help for drafting of bills, working on fiscal notes, working with practitioner groups or others to try and get better legislation, and start working on the bigger issues about, you know, whether or not Idaho's tax code is still up to date. Does it meet the needs of Idaho taxpayers? So with that, we're going to break for 10 minutes. I know it is about 20 to 4, so we need to be back by 10 till. So the break's down the hall in the cafeteria, and it's being provided by the Idaho Society CPA. So please indulge yourself and be back here at 10 till. Thank you.
Welcome to Idaho in Session, the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee channel. Idaho in Session, sponsored by Don't Fail Idaho, the Idaho State Broadcasting Association, Union Pacific Foundation, the Idaho Association of Counties, the Association of Idaho Cities, the Idaho Cable Telecommunications Association, and your contributions to Idaho Public Television Endowment, with additional support provided by the Idaho School Board Association. Welcome to Idaho in Session, the Senate channel. Idaho in Session, sponsored by Don't Fail Idaho, the Idaho State Broadcasting Association, Union Pacific Foundation, the Idaho Association of Counties, the Association of Idaho Cities, Welcome to Idaho in Session, the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee channel. Idaho in Session is sponsored by Don't Fail Idaho, the Idaho State Broadcasters Association, Union Pacific Foundation, the Idaho Association of Counties, the Association of Idaho Cities, the Idaho Cable Telecommunications Association, and your contributions to Idaho Public Television Endowment, with additional support provided by Idaho School Board Association. Welcome to Idaho in Session, the Senate channel. Idaho in Session is sponsored by Don't Fail Idaho, the Idaho State Broadcasters Association, Union Pacific Foundation, the Idaho Association of Counties, the Association of Idaho Cities, the Idaho Cable Telecommunications Association, and your contributions to the Idaho Public Television Endowment, with additional support provided by the Idaho School Board Association.
Just when you speak, just turn your phone, please. Microphones, guys. Unless he stops at the line. Yes, sir. Are you going to the line?
We don't have a bit. My bag is. My willpower to actually do I'm sure what it is. They're still pushing. So I guess I'm assuming they're just categorizing all our tags for.
So it was a short notice.
Interesting.
No?
Well,
Are you going to go short for a second?
yeah, yes.
Let's go ahead and begin our panel discussion. If you'd like to come in and find a seat. The next segment of our annual meeting is, I think, going to be very intriguing. I'm sure that some of you have heard about identity theft and fraud. We're going to have a discussion today with some experts dealing with this issue and how it potentially affects Idaho citizens and probably some of you in this room. I gave a presentation about 3 weeks ago on fraud, and it was about 250 people in the room, and I asked them by show of hands how many people had their identity stolen or been a victim of identity theft. And to my surprise, there was about 30 people in the room raised their hands, and it so impressed me that I stopped the presentation and I said, you people need to look around at all the hands that are being raised in the room. It's a very real issue. And so to begin our discussion on that today, I want to introduce Jason Bell. Is the Supervisory Special Agent for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation here in Boise. He supervises the special agents and their investigations within the state of Idaho. So I look forward to Jason's comments. Jason, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So the Idaho State Tax Commission asked me to come speak a little bit on tax refund fraud and identity theft, and they said, can you do it in 15 minutes? And I was kind of like drinking from a fire hydrant, but I was a little confused. But then I realized they had spoken to my wife, and she had told them nobody wants me to listen to me talk about tax for more than 15 minutes, so it's understandable. So first of all, I think I just want to get across what IRS criminal investigation. Many people aren't aware of us, what we are, that we're actually separate. So there's two divisions to the IRS. You have the civil side of the IRS and the criminal investigation side of the IRS. The civil side of the IRS is what most everybody knows and deals with, or you hope you deal with, I should say. So, but they're the ones who process your tax returns. They're going to do the audits, the exams. They're going to do the collection of income taxes. All of that side, they handle it. Criminal investigation side, we specifically just handle criminal violations of the Internal Revenue Code, and among a few other things. So our responsibilities, our primary focus obviously is tax crime. So Title 26 of the United States Code is what we're going to work. However, we do work other areas as well of financial investigations. We're the primary agency for the Bank Secrecy Act of Title 31 of the United States Code. And that's going to involve things like structuring with banks, moving money. And that also ties in with Title 18 of the United States Code with the Money Laundering Control Act that is put in place. So this is going to be various ways to launder money, whether it's drug-related, whether it's financing terrorist groups or political corruption, any of those types of areas. So we do a wide span of investigations. Today I'm just going to focus on a few areas within our tax fraud. Now, as you guys can see on this chart here, we see a lot of different federal programs up here and different frauds in here. You can see the most abused programs are probably Medicare and Medicaid fraud with the amount of dollars that come out of these. However, the alarming one, if you looked on, I think it's the fourth one down, is the Earned Income Tax Credit. Now, the Earned Income Tax Credit's a refundable credit, and that's what it makes it so enticing to criminals, is what they want to go after. And even though it's a lower dollar amount than the Medicare, if you look at the percentage, that's where it's quite alarming. We're usually in the low 20th percent for fraud related to the earned income credit. Now, saying that every tax return had the same amount of earned income credit, that's nearly 1 in 4 tax returns that claim the earned income credit would be a fraudulent tax return. And so it's a really eye-opening when we look at those numbers. So for the criminal investigation side of the IRS, obviously that's what we want to combat, is go after the criminals that are basically stealing taxpayers' money. All of us honest people who file in their tax returns. So within the criminal side of IRS, we have an Office of Refund Crimes. Their specific mission is to identify these schemes. Many times we're going to have organizations, individuals, or a group of individuals that are conspiring and using different methods or schemes to receive fraudulent refunds. So this group, their mission is to identify these schemes, piece them together, and then try to get them out to the field so that we can work them. To help them do this and assist them, we have what we call a scheme development center to help us detect these. Now, we have 4 of these located physically throughout the United States. And the scheme development centers, they're going to help in a few different areas. One of them is called what is called a questionable refund program, or a QRP program, and I'll touch base on that here. Another one is the return preparer program, again, RPP, and I'll touch base on that in a bit. And then our identity theft schemes. Now, identity theft has really just exploded over the years to the point to where we actually have one center that it solely handles identity theft. It's just grown so much over the years. So touching base real quick on our refund fraud programs, we have our questionable refund program. What exactly does that entail? Usually our questionable refund program, it's usually done by individuals who create completely false documents. They're creating false W-2s, false 1099s, false documents to file a tax return that's completely bogus, is what it is, in an attempt to gain a refund. One of these big ones, which we had recently, was what was referred to as a 1099 OID scheme. A 1099 OID is not a very common form that's filed, and we'd have these individuals that would, say it's filed from a bank. They would say so much money, and they would have enormous amounts of withholding and stuff, and they would claim that obviously they would have massive refunds on their tax returns. And so we worked many of these. That's just one type. Other ones, again, are false W-2s or other areas where they create false documents. That's what those groups are going to entail. Sometimes they work together. Sometimes it's individuals just doing massive amounts trying to gain lots of refunds. So our Scheme Development Center will help put those together. Our next one's our Return Preparer Program. And the Return Preparer Program tries to identify return preparers who are creating and preparing false returns. Now, we try to usually identify what they're doing type thing. Some return preparers might just focus on employee business expenses. They might try to inflate charitable contributions or medical expenses. Some of them will create bogus Schedule Cs. They're going to have different ways or different schemes. I've seen ones where they created a whole elaborate thing with horse breeding, and they created shell companies for you to pay money to and do non-recourse loans. But they're coming up with different schemes that they are promoting as a return preparer. So the return preparer schemes we try to identify, and we'll always try to identify them before each preparer season. And we'll try to develop these, and then we go out and we look at these return preparers and we'll work investigations on them. Many times this leads to each return preparer, we will have hundreds to thousands of tax returns that have been filed fraudulently. Now we think about this, a return preparer, they're going to have different motives to do this. Sometimes they make a little more money, sometimes they just get more business, so they're going to have the different motives of how they do this. But usually it comes down to money is what they do it for. And, they're maybe getting a few thousand more per return sometimes. Sometimes they're getting tens to hundreds of thousands. But if you even take 2,000 to 3,000 more a return and you do that by 1,000 returns, that's actually a great tax loss to the U.S. Taxpayers. So a little bit of our statistics nationally with our Return Preparer program, we usually will average somewhere between 300 to 400 tax returns per return preparer that we work as an agency, One of the things that we are proud about is the statistics with our conviction rate. We actually have about a 97% conviction rate, which the IRS criminal investigation is actually usually the highest or one of the highest on our conviction rate with the federal agencies. So something we are proud of in that aspect. And this leads us into our identity theft. Now, identity theft, according to the Federal Trade Commission, they do receive reports of around 9 million Americans have their identity stolen each year. It's a large amount of individuals. Now, I do want to clarify, this isn't 9 million that they're used for tax purposes. This is just 9 million overall, whether it's used for credit cards or other loan fraud or different things, but 9 million in general. Now, to steal the identities, there's a lot of different ways that they're going to go about doing this. Dumpster diving, going through looking for thrown away garbage, that's really gone down in numbers, we found, unless they're trying to target specific individuals. It's just not worth their time as much. They have much better ways to do it. Some of those are going to be skimming. Skimming is basically they're going to steal credit card information, debit card information through skimming devices. They might place them over gas stations where you go to pay with your credit card. At a restaurant, they're going to pay a server to, with their clients, they'll receive the credit card from the customer, and then they just slide it on the skimming device. So skimming devices are one way to do that. The other way is going to be phishing, where they pretend to be financial institutions or companies where you're going to receive pop-up messages on your computer, again, trying to get the information from you for you to divulge your personal information. Another one, which I'm seeing one of the more popular ways, is theft. It's much easier for them to target places like medical institutions, educational institutions, companies. It's much easier for you to go in and bribe somebody in your HR department and have them get you all the employees' information with their social security numbers, birth dates, and everything. They can get thousands of identities that way. So by just bribing somebody and getting the theft through that way is what we're really seeing. And also pretexting, using false pretenses of personal information, calling up, pretending to be financial institutions, telephone companies, again, trying to get you to divulge your personal information. So, tax refund, identity theft. So related to taxes, this occurs two different ways. One, it's going to be refund related, where they use the identity in a way to get a refund or inflate a refund. That's going to be. The other way is use the identity to have employment. So if someone comes to the U.S. illegally, they will obtain an identity so that they can work and do that. Now, usually when they work, they're going to claim exempt or very low, so they have hardly any taxes withheld. And then at the end of the year, well, the owner of the true identity, they're going to have their own stuff, plus it's going to be reported to the IRS, whatever this illegal alien did when they were working. So they can affect them in two different ways that way, and that's what we look at. So some of the current trends that we're seeing with this is refund schemes perpetrated by prisoners. It's kind of a melting pot for them. They kind of get in prison and they love to talk about their crimes and this and that, and they've kind of found, wow, refund fraud is pretty profitable. So we see that kind of exploding within that. The other one is stolen dependents for the earned income credit. That's what we see. We'll see lower income or people on welfare that don't have high income. They don't have a requirement to file. They'll go out and sell their kids' information and try to make money and do that. So seeing multiple schemes with that. The use of your identity by a prior unscrupulous return preparer, we'll see that, and it's really kind of a feeding frenzy for these guys. Once they have it, the next year they're trying to use it again before somebody else does, and it's kind of like who can use the identity first. The ladies who sold their kids' social security numbers and information, again, once the return preparer has those, now the next year they're trying to use them quickly, and the moms are trying to go sell them before somebody else uses them. Gets into a race for them. The use of identities of those not likely required to file a federal tax return. So a popular one of those are going to be, prisoners. They usually don't have a requirement to file tax returns. They didn't work, didn't make any money. Their identities are ones highly sought after. Also, U.S. territories. We're going to have Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Guam, Saipan, places like that where they have social security numbers issued to them but don't necessarily have a responsibility to file a U.S. federal income tax return. Those are the identities that the criminals are looking for more because they're not picked up as quickly of having other people actually filing the returns. Usually when they file the tax returns with the stolen identities, they're going to use things such as the Schedule C, Schedule D. They're going to use other types of documents. If somebody has a Schedule C business, it's not an easy way for the IRS to say, yeah, that's a fraudulent return, whereas it's a W-2 wage earner. The employer's going to report it, and our systems will match them and kick it out and saying, no, this doesn't look right. So they know what to look for and where to file on those. So you guys see a little bit of our identity statistics here. This is 2011, 12, and 13, almost the full year of 13. And you can just see how it's really gone up in numbers, starting off with 276 investigations up through almost more than, 741 to 1370. That wasn't quite through the end of the year. Just really exploding every year. We're seeing more and more. Now, I can tell some of you are thinking, wow, we had, 9 million, identity thefts reported Federal Trade Commission, and, we probably, now that's not all tax related, but, still there's probably a couple or a few million that are related to tax, and, well, the IRS only has a few hundred to, 1,400 investigations. But let me explain a little bit of what our investigations entail when we investigate. So if we investigate an individual, we don't look just at the individual. We're trying to put together schemes of groups of individuals or people filing, usually hundreds of these. So once we've identified a person, it's usually a person or group of persons, and they're filing hundreds to thousands of tax returns with stolen identities. And each tax return is going to have anywhere from 2 to 6 stolen identities on it. So again, if we take those thousands of tax returns for one of our investigations by 5 or 6 identities usually on average, because they want to get the max earned income credit. So that's usually what we're seeing. And, it doesn't take long to where we're actually these 1,300 investigations is actually hundreds of thousands of identities involved with those investigations. So if not in the millions. So it is growing a lot. And as you're seeing this growing, here's a map that shows our January statistics of 2013. Just in this 1 month of January, we had 389 identity theft suspects that led to 734 enforcement actions. This took place in 32 states and in Puerto Rico. It involved over 215 cities. We had over 109 arrests, 189 indictments or informations or complaints filed, and 47 search warrants that were executed in that 1 month related to identity theft. So what we've really seen is where we've seen tax fraud in the past, it's really been a white-collar crime. And now it's really moved to a street-level crime. Gangs that used to be selling drugs to mainly do that, or they moved into human trafficking and the sex trade. They've now found, well, gee, it's a lot easier to sit behind a computer and file a tax return. I can file one tax return and get $5,000. Do a few of those in a day and, have a $50,000 day, no problem. So we've really seen it, as you can see, on the East Coast and the bigger cities and stuff. It has just exploded with the gangs now into a street-level crime of identity theft with tax refund fraud. We haven't seen it as much in the middle states. Now, it doesn't mean that somebody in Idaho didn't have their ID stolen, but it was used in a scheme in one of those other states. So with time short, I'm going to skip over some of this, but I'm going to touch base real quick here on 2 minutes? Okay, I'm going to jump real quick here, but enforcement partnering. What we've done is we've identified stolen identity refund fraud as SURF cases. We have Department of Justice Tax Division, where they in the past had to review every tax charge. They've now streamlined that, and they've now allowed the local U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute those without approval from Department of Justice Tax Division. That really slowed down our process in the past. The other one is what we're doing is the Law Enforcement Assistance Program, LEAP, where we are partnering with local law enforcement officers. That was March 29th, 2013. So what we're trying to see is if we have victims of IRS, what we want them to do is they're going to obtain an ID theft PIN from civil IRS. They're going to fill out and sign a Form 1439 affidavit, which will report that and help them get the PIN. And they can also fill out an 8821, which will allow the IRS to release their tax return to local law enforcement to help us combat that, so that they can also help us do that. So I'm not going to get into ITIN fraud. It's pretty much the same as ID theft, just foreign people like that. And
Jason, I want to appreciate what you've given to us today. I scanned across the audience out here, and there's not very many people looking at their iPads. You've captured their attention, and I think it's only going to get more interesting as we proceed. Jason, thank you for your comments. We appreciate you being here. We'll maybe have some questions in a little bit. Next for the panel, I want to introduce Evan Sylvester. Evan is the Information Security Officer for Fast Enterprises. Fast Enterprises is what the state of Idaho uses for contracting of our computer software for the tax and revenue department. He's a certified information system security professional with 10 years of academic and professional experience. Evan, look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm going to give a high-level overview of network security, kind of give everybody an idea of how identities are actually stolen online through cybercrime and hackers. And to start, just want to introduce myself, kind of talk a little bit about why I'm capable of speaking on this topic. I'm a CISSP, a CCNA. Those are two security certifications. Before joining Fast Enterprises, I worked at a private security firm in San Antonio, Texas. I consulted for numerous Fortune 1000 clients. I did offensive security, where I actively tried to break into client organizations with permission. I also did defensive security, where I consulted with clients on a regular and daily basis on how to secure their networks, keep the bad guys out. And through all of that, I developed the skills to eventually join Fast Enterprises as their information security officer. At Fast Enterprises, I've enjoyed it so far. It's a great company. And moving on to security. So let's talk about security. Deborah Plunkett, the Information Assurance Director with the NSA, says, "There's no such thing as secure anymore. We have to build our systems on the assumption that adversaries will get in." Now, this is the NSA saying that people are going to get in. Possibly the most sophisticated cyber organization in the U.S. government is saying we can't keep bad guys out. They're going to get in. And so kind of with that stance, we got to move on with the idea, and we got to assume we're going to be a target. And essentially all U.S. organizations are a target. Governmental organizations, private companies, individuals, all these, everybody's a target. So let's talk about some recent cases that occurred. So the White House and the State Department recently had to shut down parts of their network in October and November after it was determined that hackers had infiltrated it. Now, they don't believe that any actual sensitive information was stolen. However, they still had to alert and shut down all the systems. Now, something also important is to realize that not just big organizations or big targets like the White House are being sought after. Hackers are trying to get into smaller governmental organizations. The two examples given were the Government Printing Office and the Government Accountability Office. These are organizations that do various types of work and activity, and not really what you would consider a prime target for hackers. So who is the enemy? Who is breaking into these organizations? Right here we have the People's Liberation Army Unit 61398. The Justice Department recently put out an announcement that they were seeking these individuals in relations to thousands of possible cyber breaches that this unit carried out. Now, this unit is believed to be working for the Chinese government, and basically they have a large budget, unlimited funding, unlimited time, and all of these individuals are very well respected within their field for their abilities and capabilities to breach networks. And so this right here represents pretty much the most severe type of threat, government actors, government agencies targeting U.S. organizations. However, on the other side of that spectrum, we have to worry about things like this. We have to worry about 19-year-old students. This individual right here was believed to be responsible for the recent security breach with Canada's Revenue Agency. This individual exploited the Heartbleed vulnerability over a period of 6 hours. Within those 6-hour period, this individual compromised several hundred social insurance numbers, which is the social security number equivalent for Canada. And, you know, he did this out of his dorm room at a university in Canada. And the thing is, you know, it's not just sophisticated organizations that can carry out these types of attacks, but it's 19-year-old kids in their dorm room just seeing if they can kind of get away with it. There have been several high-profile recent breaches involving government organizations, specifically the data breaches. The big one was the South Carolina Department of Revenue breach. In this particular case, there was 3.3 million unencrypted bank account numbers and 3.8 million tax returns that were stolen. In this specific example, it was probably one of the biggest governmental agency breaches related to personally identifiable information. Also, there were several other incidents, namely the California Department of Social Services sending an item through the mail package rips open and dumps out several 100,000 pieces of microfiche that contain personally identifiable information. And so, these things do happen. Also, there were several high-profile private industry data breaches recently. Last year, around this time, the Target breach occurred, and this was something that probably could not have come at a worse time for Target. It was during the holiday season. It was right after Thanksgiving, right before people were ramping up all their Christmas shopping, and Target got hit, and they got hit hard. With this specific case, you basically had 40 million credit card numbers stolen, as well as 70 million pieces of personally identifiable information. More recently, there was the Home Depot breach, and the Home Depot breach had 56 million debit or credit card numbers compromised, making it the largest credit card breach in history. With regards to the Home Depot breach, it went on for about 3 months before it was finally detected. As well as the 50-plus million credit cards that were stolen, there was also over 50 million email accounts stolen in that breach as well. So let's talk a little bit about how the attackers carried out this specific breach, and roughly over 100 million between both companies were lost with credit card numbers. So the piece of software that was used is called Black POS. Black POS is a piece of commercially available malware on the black market. For roughly $1,800, you can buy the basic version through black market websites. This version allows you to install the software on point-of-sale systems, and from there it can basically skim credit card numbers as the transaction occurs. You can also buy an enhanced version of this software from cyber criminals for $2,300, and that enhanced version has some additional features and functionalities. And these tools are readily available if you know where to find them, and they don't really cost that much money. We're talking about something that costs $1,800 or $2,300, and it's led to the compromise of over 100 million credit card numbers, and Target has posted huge losses in relation to this. Home Depot has also posted huge losses in relation to this. Also, something to take into account is specifically with the email addresses that are stolen. If I'm a bad guy and I steal a bunch of credit card numbers and email addresses, not only do I have your credit card numbers, which I can start using, but now I have your email addresses. And so if I'm a bad guy who stole the Home Depot email addresses, I would probably send a phishing email to individuals with those email addresses. I'd say, I'm from Home Depot, there was a credit breach, and we just need you to enter your personally identifiable information, your social security number, and we'll put you on credit monitoring services. Those email addresses can be further exploited and result in further compromise of individuals' information. So recently, one of the most interesting incidents related to corporate security has occurred, and this is an ongoing and emerging issue. And essentially the setting is, imagine you're at work, you're sitting around the office, and next thing you know, all the screens turn to this. And that's what happened at Sony Pictures Entertainment. Across the entire corporate network, this image popped up on all desktops and workstations all at once across the entire world. It's a 7,000 employee company, and you basically had 7,000 PCs with this showing up on it. And so let's talk a little bit about the Sony Pictures Entertainment breach. So it's an ongoing investigation. Little is known about it right now. Sony is not being very public with a lot of the information as they continue their investigation. There is a group that is claiming responsibility. They're the Guardians of Peace, or GOP. And the Guardians of Peace basically have specific demands, although those demands really aren't very rational. But with the recent breach, the finger really has been pointed at North Korea in relation to an upcoming film with James Franco and Seth Rogen that basically puts North Korea's leader in a bad light. And the current belief is that North Korean state-sponsored hackers were the individuals that carried out this Sony Pictures Entertainment security breach. So let's talk a little bit about what the hackers got with this breach. They've basically been releasing the data on peer-to-peer file sharing services. A part of that data is they've compromised over 47,000 social security numbers of past and current employees, many of them celebrities. With those celebrities, Sylvester Stallone was confirmed as an individual who had his information leaked. Also, with regards to the personal information, a lot of this is addresses, and so you've got addresses and very sensitive information related to high-profile individuals. They also got a large number of internal documents. These internal documents range from salaries of individuals to basically employee complaints about the organization. And all these internal communications, internal information is basically making its way online, and more of it's being released. One of the most stunning things that were released is released online on peer-to-peer sharing services is 5 unreleased movies. Several movies that were not even in theaters, is not even been released in small audiences, is now readily available online if you want to go download it illegally. And the idea is that, that's going to be a huge amount of lost revenue, just the cost to make movies, but now that those movies are available online before they've even gone to theaters. So I just kind of want to end the presentation talking a little bit about just some hard numbers. Specifically, Verizon had a data breach investigation report that was recently released. I would encourage anybody interested to visit the link at verizonenterprises.com/DBIR. And basically, within this report, there was over 63,000 security incidents, 1,300 confirmed data breaches. And let's just talk a little bit about the numbers. As you see here, we have hacking and malware and social engineering as the main factors in security incidents. With regards to the hacking, the malware, and the social engineering as a way to breach sensitive information, really it's maintained about the same pattern as far as regards to the ways that the individuals are carrying it out. But the thing I think that really hits home with this particular slide is you got to see the type of growth that has occurred since 2008. These types of incidents are just taking off. It's becoming more and more prevalent. That's almost exponential growth, and this is essentially incidents involving compromise of information. So who's responsible? Essentially, it's external actors. However, the insider threat is always very real. One of the things specifically that I find very interesting with this slide is that the internal threat goes down once the recession starts. And so people might be more concerned about losing their jobs, so they're not going to scam the company as much during rough economic times. But as the economy improves, you start to see the insider threat grows again, which I just find very interesting. Finally, let's just talk about how these breaches are discovered. Breach discovery is, for the first time ever, discovered by outside parties. This is a case where the organization that was breached doesn't know they're breached. They don't know that they've had their sensitive information compromised. They only know after agencies approach them, basically stating, you are the one factor that ties together all of these identity theft cases. And so that's just something very interesting to me, as well as there's the belief that most organizations don't know they've been compromised on average until 200 days after an incident. And so many times people, business as usual until they get that knock on the door. So thank you very much for your time, and essentially I think we'll do questions later. So thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Well, next I want to turn to back to the Idaho perspective. I want to introduce Doreen Warren is the Idaho Tax Commission's Revenue Operations Administrator in charge of processing tax returns and payments for the agency. And joining her will be Randy Tilley as the Tax Commission's Audit Division Administrator in charge of examining returns. And they will kind of tag team. And I'll turn it over to you, Doreen.
And we have negative 5 minutes to do this, so bear with us. So good afternoon, and we appreciate the national perspective from Jason and Evan. Randy and I are going to turn it back to the Idaho Tax Commission experience and what we're finding. So to begin with, let's talk about what is fraud, or what do we consider fraud. First of all, tax returns filed with the intent to receive monetary gain to which the person is not entitled is what we're looking at as for fraud. Fraudulent returns are identified in multiple ways. Sometimes there are schemes that we can identify. Other times, there's just distinctive characteristics about a return that we can use to identify that return. Also, purposely filing a return using another individual's information is another form of fraud, and that's the identity theft piece that Randy will be talking more about here shortly. One thing we do want to remind people is that fraud does not occur when people make honest mistakes on their income tax returns. So we will get those returns that come in. They have math edits. There's a misunderstanding of the tax law. We do not consider that as fraud. So what are some of the common fraud methods? We heard from Jason the falsifying W-2s and 1099s. We find it at the state level as well. Taxpayers trying to lower their tax liability by hiding income, inflating or manufacturing their business expenses, and also falsely claiming credits and deductions. The third area is the identity theft that we will cover in more detail. So some of the fraud trends that we're finding at the Tax Commission is that most of the fraudulent returns that we've identified have been electronically filed, which makes sense because we receive the majority of our returns electronically. We're also finding that the fraudsters are very persistent. They don't just stop with filing one return, as Jason was explaining. They'll sit there at a computer and file multiple returns. They also found out that we process returns after April 15th. So historically, we saw a dramatic decline after the due date. This last year, it went all summer and into the fall, and we're still identifying those fraud returns. Fraud returns are also, they're going beyond claiming that typical withholding on the W-2. They're finding out that we're looking closely at the W-2, so they've extended it to 1099s, and with the increase in the grocery credit, we're seeing more and more fraud trying to get the grocery credit. Just to share some recent statistics from the Tax Commission perspective, in 2011, we had confirmed 183 fraudulent returns totaling $206,000. In 2013, it jumped to 574 confirmed returns for $605,000. This year so far, we've confirmed 1,112 returns totaling almost $1.4 million. So it is dramatically increasing. A couple points that I want to make with the statistics is that, as we talked about, Social Security numbers are becoming more and more readily available. Almost half of our currently confirmed returns that we found this year were married filing joint. So historically, they've been just the single returns. Also, of these confirmed fraud, I'm proud to say that we have stopped those refunds, except for approximately fewer than 10 were actually paid out for less than $10,000. So we think we're doing a good job, but this is what we know. It's not what we don't know. So I'm going to turn it over to Randy.
Thanks, Doreen. I'm just going to mention real briefly some things on identity theft. What is identity theft? I think Jason went into it a little bit. Someone knowingly or wrongfully obtains and uses another person's personal data in some way that involves fraud or deception for economic gain or benefits. And the personal data we're talking about includes Social Security numbers, names and addresses, and account numbers. So when we talk about identity theft and taxes, we're looking at a stolen tax identity, so one or more tax returns filed with stolen using someone else's identity. Dependent identity theft, and Jason talked about this with regards to the earned income credit, where they're taking identities and using them to add more dependents on a return to increase the earned income credit. But in Idaho, we see that same thing with regards to the grocery credit. It's not as much money, but it still is, in the fraudster's mind, free money. And then there's the employment identity theft, where someone is using an illegally acquired Social Security number to obtain a job where they do not have the right to work in Idaho. Here is the some numbers on the identity theft. In the 2013, we had approximately 760,000 returns filed. So back in 2010, we found 18 cases of identity theft. That nearly tripled in 2011, and again tripled again in 2012 to 170, and tripled again in 2013 to 648. So if this trend continues, where it triples every year,
by tax year 2019, we will have more identity theft cases than we actually have filed returns this year. So that is somewhat of a staggering statistic, and we're looking to try to halt that process as best we can. So I'm going to turn it back over to Doreen to talk about how we identify those fraud and identity theft cases.
So, how do we identify the fraud? We have flags. First of all, we look at the taxpayer. If it's an unknown taxpayer, or commonly called our first-time filers, if there's no historical information regarding that individual, it's a flag. So if it's a new taxpayer, we don't recognize the address, and there's no other activity in Idaho, it's a flag. Also, W-2s issued with erroneous information, such as the wages and withholding amounts, if they cannot be verified, if the employer doesn't exist in our system, or if the employee doesn't exist for that particular employer, it's a flag. Also, as we're looking at the returns, we're going through the review process, we will oftentimes send out a request for information letter trying to get more clarification. You'd be surprised, but we do not get those letters back, and we'd get no response from the taxpayer if it's truly a fraud return. So again, it's a flag. So if we have no response, we'll do a little bit more investigation, and a lot of times we'll find that it is a fraud. So how do we check for fraud? The good old gut feeling. As we're going through these returns, we've been getting a lot of education and training from Randy's group as far as how to find fraud. So our staff are trained, so we have them looking at these returns, and they are able to identify fraud returns. Also, we use our automated system. We use the tools that we have at hand. So we use our validations and our edits. We have over 200 review items, so every return goes through this automated review, and if it kicks for one of our items, it goes through that manual review process. Just to put it into perspective how we've grown into our review process because of fraud, and fraud has been a lot of the driver. Several years ago, we reviewed approximately 8% of the returns as they came in. This year, or currently, we're reviewing approximately 20% of those electronically filed returns and approximately 50% of the paper returns. We also look at external data sources, such as information from Department of Labor, Fish and Game, and driver's licenses. This is a very busy representation of what revenue operations does with an individual income tax return. And I'm just going to jump through these really quickly. This is just a way to highlight where we identify fraud within our processing flow. So we find it as we're opening the mail. You'd be surprised how many people will send in returns, or the fraudsters filing returns, sometimes in the same envelope or sometimes in the same time frame, where we can recognize those schemes on the physical documents. Also, as we're adding new taxpayers or changing addresses in our database, we find indicators that find the fraud returns. Also, again, as we're reviewing the returns through our business process in our taxpayer accounting area, that's where we find a good portion of our fraud returns. And again, so we have a refund process as well. So even if a return comes in, bypasses all of my edits, there's another opportunity to identify that fraud return, and that's in our refund review process. So one of the things that we have been focusing on over the last few years is to ensure we have the collaboration between the processing side of the house and the prosecution part of the house, or the enforcement. So my division and Randy's division has been working very closely together in that collaborative mode, so that once we identify a suspicious return, we turn it over to Randy, who will take it to the next level.
And what we do with those suspicious filers or those suspicious returns depends on whether it's been identified as potential fraud or identity theft. So let's start with the fraud piece. The first thing that we do in the processing side is we stop the refund from issuing. So we don't let the money go out the door. And as Doreen said, we've been very effective. We've identified almost $1.4 million in fraud this last year, and very, very small amount has actually gone out the door. The next thing that we do is we will determine if the fraud perpetrator is in Idaho. If that perpetrator is in Idaho, then we're going to start building a criminal case. Our jurisdiction does not extend beyond the borders of Idaho. But there's some things that we can do with that perpetrator if they are outside of Idaho. We have information exchange agreements with other states, and with our other GenTax states, we put that on a suspicious filer list, so that it puts notice out there to those other states that there is a potential fraud scheme going on, and those other states can be looking for that so that it can prevent that fraud. And we get that same information from other states so that we can prevent those types of things from happening in our state. But as we build that criminal case, we will look at the numbers of the returns and the amounts of the fraudulent returns to build that case. And then we must work with our county prosecutors to obtain charges going forward on that criminal case. And then we act as subject matter experts to testify in court as necessary when those charges actually go before the courts. So here's just a couple of examples of cases that we've worked on. This first one, the man gets prison for college student tax exam. This individual was working a scam out of Pocatello. He was holding himself out as a accounting student, and he was charging the students of Idaho State University $10 to prepare their return, getting them huge refunds, but he would not show them their actual copy of the return, and the money was actually deposited into his account, and then he would give them what he felt was their return. So we were building a case on this individual, and unfortunately, before we got the charges filed, he went to Texas. But we have a good partnership with our friends at the Criminal Investigation Division and the IRS, who pursued this case with the information that we provided. And ultimately, he was found guilty and sentenced to prison, and then ordered to repay over $1.5 million to both the federal and the state. And the other aspect of this prosecution was that this individual was not a U.S. citizen, so upon the completion of his prison term, he will be deported from the United States. The next case is a little more local. This is a Nampa woman gets prison time for tax fraud. This individual submitted a false W-2 claiming a very high amount of withholding tax. She even falsified documents that stated that this was from prior years' employment, and tried to get that refund paid through that process. She was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to 5 years with 3 years fixed. So that was one of the cases that our folks worked very closely on with the Canyon County prosecutor, and we thank the prosecutors in working with us to prosecute those fraud cases, because that gets the word out that we are serious about reviewing and prosecuting people who try to take money from Idaho citizens fraudulently. On the identity theft side, we're a little bit different from the IRS and their criminal investigation, because they're looking at trying to prosecute the individuals. But what our focus on identity theft is really trying to help the victim. So our first steps is we communicate with the victim, and the first challenge that we have is to verify our identity to the victim and the victim's identity to us. So if somebody's identity has been stolen, we want to make sure that we're talking to the true owner of that identity, and we want to make sure that they are talking to the right people who is not trying to steal their identity as well. So what we do is we work closely with them. We provide resources to assist the victim in reporting and resolving stolen identities. We follow up with the victim as we manage the case through the tax return processing, and we communicate with the fraud unit as necessary to try to pursue the individual who stole the identity so we can seek criminal charges against that individual. We assist them on the federal side to get the federal form 14039 identity theft affidavit completed. And help them through the process of getting their identity protection personal identification number, or IPPIN. This is used on the federal returns only. And each year an individual will need to get a new IPPIN so that they can assure that their returns are processed. If they someone using their social security number tries to process a return without the IPPIN, then that return stops and doesn't process. On the state side, as I said, we work with them to take care of their federal issues, and since we closely follow the federal guidelines, we're going to have them attach a copy of that 14039 to their return, as well as a copy of their driver's license. And they can staple that to the back of a paper return or attach a PDF document to an electronically filed return. And what that allows us to do is all those returns that come in with that 14039, we will stop for a manual review for the first time. But after that, we can speed up their processing of their legitimate refunds so that they can go through. Finally, what we've done is we've created an Idaho identity theft web page. The link is here, as you can see. What that provides is a lot of links to other agencies, Federal Trade Commission, which is the federal agency responsible for reporting and dealing with identity theft, and other forms and brochures that may be necessary to assist in the tax filing, including a link to the 14039 form. So, as you can see, there's a lot of cases that we've got with regards to fraud and identity theft, and they are increasing substantially. We are fortunate in one regard that we're receiving more data from our external sources, from the IRS, from other state agencies, to help us identify the potential identity theft and fraud cases. But we also have limited resources to pursue those as much as we would like. And when we do pursue those, we're pulling those resources to work fraud and identity theft from our regular functions of doing regular audits and pursuing non-filer cases that are a regular part of the audit process. And it also slows down return processing. When a return kicks out and it takes time to review that, it takes significantly longer for a legitimate refund to pay than it would if there were no fraud issues or identity theft issues. So I'm going to turn it over to Doreen to talk a little bit about what we're doing to kind of build that infrastructure.
And we'll try to do this quickly. So what have we done to fight fraud? So methodically build the infrastructure. Over the years, we try to make sure that we're always trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys. So what we've done over the years is we've tightened our return edits and reviews that we've talked about. So we've gone from that 8% to the 20%. We're trying to isolate the fraud detection workload. So we're able to concentrate our efforts on the fraud while still processing the other returns. We continually train our staff so that they know what to look for, they know the schemes that are out there. We also participate in the National Suspicious Filer Working Group, along with working with the states, the IRS, and software developers. For 2015, some of the enhancements that we have coming on this year is we have enhanced analytics. This is allowing us to score some of our returns that are potentially fraud. We're using internal data, and we're able to isolate those returns that have a higher potential of being fraud. We also have the fraud manager that Commissioner Jackson mentioned earlier, so that we can build specific edits for the fraud, and we can concentrate those and have a specific group working on those. Along with that fraud manager, if we have a suspicious return and we want to clarify that it is truly the taxpayer, this year we're trying something new. We're sending out a letter to that taxpayer asking them to send back identification so that we can prove they are who they say they are. So that's something that is new for this year. Also, when people come in and they want to ask questions, whether it's in person, on the phone, or via email, we are tightening our processes to make sure that they are who they say they are. So we're going to be asking them 3 to 4 questions to validate their identities. As we move forward, we're looking at expanding our scoring capabilities even further so that we can use public and internal data sources for that scoring. What we're trying to do, again, is to lower our review rate and concentrate on those truly fraudulent returns. We're also incorporating a process that requires a taxpayer to take a quiz to verify identity when certain criteria are met. This is a similar process that's already in place by banks and credit card companies. So you'll go out, you'll do a survey, they'll ask you what your license plate number was back in 1980. And if you can remember that, then they'll pass you and you'll go on through the system. But we'll have control of those questions, so it won't be that difficult. Also, whatever we want to do is not going to come cheap. It does come at a price, and Commissioner Roberts is going to talk more about that. So I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to him.
Thank you. I'm going to let you go ahead and push the button for me.
Okay.
Because I've got 3 short slides, and we're going to be done in 60 seconds. One of the main things that we think the Idaho citizens wants the Tax Commission to do is to protect their personal information and their tax data and to help protect them in this. What does it take? It takes maintaining our software system on an annual basis to stay current and to stay ahead of the criminals. We think that's the right thing to do. We think it's prudent for the taxpayers of the state of Idaho, and that's what that purpose of that annual maintenance agreement will be. Number 2, we think it's important to have a fraud and identity theft staff. Quite a few states now are moving to identity theft and fraud detection units within the revenue agencies. We think that if we don't keep the pace, we will become the playground that criminals will like to play in. I don't know about you, but I don't want Idaho to be that playground. And I think it's important for us to stay ahead of them. And we're going to have to hire top drawer IT individuals. We're going to have to focus on the protection of the taxpayers' information. And the last slide, the other thing that I think we have to do is we have equipment that scans information on paper returns in our office. It's old, it's getting outdated. In fact, they're going to stop making parts for it by the end of this year in about 3 weeks. So we have to start upgrading that equipment because the consistency and the quality of that data going into the system is also what fraudsters are going to be after, and we want the best quality information within our system. That, ladies and gentlemen, I think should pique your attention. That is the end of our presentation. I'd like to have Commissioner Casamades, Commissioner Jackson, Mike Chakrin, Mike Teller, and Debbie Colson to join us up on the podium here. If there's any questions, there's cards you can ask a question on if you don't want to speak, or if you want to ask a quick question. We do have a roaming microphone. Is there anybody that has a question? One right here. Could you wait, because we're being streamed live and we have an audience that's not in the room. Thank you.
The IRS requires the IP PIN each year to be entered after an identity theft. Are you going to require them to annually attach the 14039 either as a PDF or as a paper attachment? That wasn't mentioned, so.
I'm going to defer that.
That at the IRS level?
Yeah, the IRS requires you to enter a new IP PIN every year. After you've had identity theft, they'll issue you a brand new number, and each correspondence, everything you do for that calendar year, you will have to enter that number with them. So didn't know at the state level if you're requiring something ongoing like that.
Doreen, Randy?
On the federal level, I can't answer for the civil side. I mean, civil side handles all that in the processing. I just do criminal, but I'll defer to them on the state level.
So what we have indicated is that if once you get the identity theft, you're going to have to file that 14039 copy with the state for every year. So we don't have access to the IPPINs. That's the federal processing number. And they're not going to share it with us because they want to make sure that they protect that identity. But we are looking for that 14039 every year. And that's one of the concerns with their identity theft, is it can be cumulative. So if you don't have your identity stolen this year, it may be next year, and then we'll have to track that from that point forward to make sure that we don't have any fraud returns.
Other questions? Why don't you go ahead and just read the card from there? Might be quicker. Other questions while we're processing this one? Question, the Idaho Tax Commission, I don't know if I can read it. Study Task Force recommends the creation of a new position called Director of Revenue. Do the commissioners support this recommendation? So that's the question. I think what I'm going to answer quickly, and I'm going to defer to Commissioner Jackson and Commissioner Casamedes. I think what we're after is following what the policymakers of the state desire to do, and ultimately the citizens of the state of Idaho. And if they desire to have a director and a little bit different structure, we will carry out the desires of the policymakers. I think it's important to not vest too much power in any one individual in the state, and especially in regards to taxation. And that's just some preface that I would give on that. Commissioner Jackson or Casamedes, any other comments?
I think probably the best answer to that was in the Idaho Business Review, and the governor was going to look at it. And once the governor makes these recommendations, we'll deal with it.
Well, thank you for the question. Appreciate Chairman Lake here also, for the head of that commission. Good to be here. Good for you to have your input. I'm a little bit in the minority on this in more ways than one, but I'm of the opinion we've got a good system. It's working pretty well, and I'm real hesitant about changing that thing right now until I have a little more information about it. I don't know what added benefit a director would give to us beyond what we're doing now, unless we're talking about trying to change some administrative duties. That's a possibility, but I do have some hesitance about it. I think the Constitution gives us the authority, the 4 commissioners, to follow through with the laws that are in place, and I think we're doing a pretty good job. A lot of this tax commission, as Bob Geddes can tell, is personality driven. And when he came into the commission, he pretty much flipped the commission on its head in a really good way. And made the thing work really well. And so I have some hesitancy, to be truthful about it, and I'm not going to back off and not say that. So let's wait and see what happens.
Commissioner Jackson.
I might make one comment. I think if you look at since Bob's reign and what we've got going, this group of commissioners have worked very cohesively and to a consensus point. And I think if you watch the evolution that we talked about at the beginning, the tax system is working pretty good. And I don't want to really destroy that, but if there's another way, the funding will have to come from someplace, because all we've done for the last 2 years is shrink in size and do more. And when you do that, we better have some very serious problems before we start changing things, and we better have some money to do it with.
Other questions? See a question back here. Could you identify yourself? Would be helpful.
My name's Joe Larson. I'm the Caddo County Clerk. I've got a question that's more on a macro level with our IRS representative here. With the imposition of the Affordable Care Act and implementation of some of the employer mandates that are going to take place that involve municipalities, counties, the state, everybody in general, with some of the forms, a couple of new forms that we're going to be filling out in reference to what you've just brought up about identity theft and another breach of information that we house in, that I'm the custodian of the record of in our county, as are other entities. Is the IRS ramping up, or are the IRS people ramping up the work you're going to need to do for the introduction of potential fraud internationally, domestically, that's probably going to be introduced by some of the things we've already found out we're ill-prepared to run? How's the IRS approaching that? I look at this as a bigger and a wider open door for these issues we're talking about to exponentially even be worse than they are.
Yeah, to answer that. So are we ramping up? Well, I think you guys have seen the IRS's budget has been cut every year for the last few years. We're at the lowest employment rating since 1970 is our employment staffing right now. So we would like to ramp up for it. We are aware of it. We are doing what we can. And as far as what we're expecting as far as fraud, What we're seeing now, and I just received some emails and briefings on this, but essentially we're going to be seeing another refundable credit on the tax return, which you guys all know. And to me, anytime I see a refundable credit, it just screams fraud. It says, hey, there's free money for you. There's our foreign aid. There's our, we give it out. So it's, unfortunately, that's going to be the way it's going to do it. And right along with these stolen identities, that's going to be in another area that they can hit and do. So absolutely, we are expecting it. We're seeing it. And I don't know if it's going to increase our workload. It's just another line item on the tax return that we're going to be dealing with. And so, as far as the identity theft, it's going to increase the earned income credit, the child tax credit, the additional child tax credit, and I'm sure they're going to take advantage and go right there for the Affordable Care Act credit as well. So, yeah, we're expecting it, and, hopefully we can get control of it.
Thank you, Jason. Other questions? Well, I think I just want to conclude, if there are no other questions, we appreciate your patience. We did go over a little bit on time today, but I want to just close with this, that Doreen said this in her presentation, and I want to reiterate what she said. We're doing the best job we can with the resources that we have to stop fraud and identity theft within the state of Idaho. It is here, it's present, it's growing rapidly, we know that. We know it's growing rapidly across the world. We don't want to be that playground for criminals. We're catching this, the stat you saw is what we are catching. It's what we're not catching that we're concerned about. And the estimations of that are staggering. And I know you probably couldn't see the numbers on Jason's slide. Those were not millions of dollars. Those were billions of dollars in fraud. Billions, 40 to 50 billion dollars per year. So this is a big issue. It's something that we need to address because the dollars that are stolen from tax entities and revenue agencies across this country and this state are dollars that could go to educate kids, that could go to build roads, and all the other things that need to be done for public service. But thank you for your cooperation, your time. If you have any questions, please feel to reach out to us. We will be glad to strike up a conversation. And thank you for your attendance today.
Appropriations Committee channel. Idaho session sponsored by Don't Fail Idaho. The Idaho State Broadcasters Association. Union Pacific Foundation. The Idaho Association of Counties. The Association of Idaho Cities. The Idaho Cable Telecommunications Association. And your